Metal Gear Solid Delta Snake Eater is finally here, a chance to venture back to this absolutely classic video game and experience the story of Naked Snake as he ventures to the Soviet Union on his mission codename Snake Eater and has to take on his once mentor, the boss. This game and franchise as a whole has shaped many people's gaming experiences, including mine, and it's hard not to think about my earlier days of gaming without the Metal Gear series being in there. So when Konami reached out to me and asked me to cover the lore of Metal Gear Solid Delta Snake Eater, I jumped on it, as it allowed me to dive into this incredible world and experience the game all over again. So in today's video we will be exploring all of the lore you need to know that happens prior to the events of this game, getting to know the mysterious and insidious group of the Philosophers, the incredibly powerful and heroic Cobra unit, including Snake's mentor, the boss, as well as everyone else who Snake encounters during his mission on the Virtuous mission and Operation Snake Eater. Obviously this video is sponsored by Metal Gear Solid Delta Snake Eater, and with it they gave me full access to the game early to help make this full lore dive. So if you want to experience this incredible game for yourselves, then hit the link in the description below, and of course sit back and relax as we explore all of the lore you need to know before you can immerse yourselves in the new remake of Metal Gear Solid Delta Snake Eater. The year was 1918 and the First World War had finally come to an end, allowing the world to go back to a form of normality once again. Around that time in the post-war world, possibly in the year of 1922, a secret group of the most wealthy and powerful minds throughout the countries of the United States, Russia and China would go on to unite together under the new name of the Philosophers and the meeting named the Wise Man's Committee. This secretive group originally had one mission, and it was a bold and honourable one as well. It was to make sure they used all of their money, intellect and resources to push the world into a new direction, one where war would never happen ever again and the world could prosper because of it. For a time this worked, but eventually the secretive group would start to become corrupted from the inside and a lot of infighting happened, to the point where the original founders of it were being killed and dying due to other power-hungry individuals or through nefarious means. The last founding member would officially die in 1930, but this was as a consequence of telling their young daughter the true horrors of what the new Philosophers who were taken over were doing, that they were in fact causing new wars, and ultimately they had become war itself. Everything happening over the globe was of their doing, and they had humanity in their grasp and watched as the chaos ensued. After the final founding member had died, the Philosophers fell into madness, and as you can tell, the ideas of the original Wise Man's Committee did not pass down onto the future generations. It died with that final original member. Not only did the new Philosophers trigger this never-ending spiral of wars, but they would also now set up their own independent political forces which had their own unique agents and had schools which trained up all of their new operatives that would infiltrate themselves into the ranks of the highest seats in government and completely undermine them to serve the Philosophers' goals for the world. Not only that, but they would also go on to create a new type of school that would be known as a charm school, which included an American Soviet Chinese facility that would take in multiple children from all over the world and train them from a young age to become spies for one, if not all of the nations that needed them. One specific girl that would be trained within this facility was a young girl from Idaho who would become known as simply Eva. Just before the World War II began, the Philosophers came up with a brand new idea, and that was to pull together all of their resources, and with it estimated a total of $100 billion, which was an amount no one at the time, and even to this day, could comprehend. But anyways, pulling all of this money together, they would use it to create brand new, never before seen weapons of mass destruction that would totally dominate all global affairs for years on end, which of course included nuclear weapons, advanced rockets, and a group that would be known as the Cobra unit, that was said to be a unique squad of super soldiers. The Cobra unit was officially created in the year of 1942 and was led by one of these super soldiers under the name of the Joy, and were utilized in one of the most significant battles in all of World War II, that being the Battle of Stalingrad, where, together with the Soviet Union forces, would go against all of the odds and fend off the Axis march into the Eastern Front. These soldiers that consisted of heavily modified individuals named the Pain, the Fear, the End, the Fury, and the Sorrow were all trained with one main goal, and that was to win the war, and would have all of their unique abilities brought forward by the emotions that they took into battle with them. The Pain, for example, would be born during the mid-1900s to early 1910s and was infected with parasites that gave him the ability to secrete pheromones, giving him control over insects, and would also receive large amounts of adrenaline in response to pain. The End, however, would be born in 1860s, making him 80 years old during the Battle of Stalingrad, and was also infected with a parasite that gave him an incredible lifespan and also natural abilities as a sniper, helping him to camouflage to the point of being invisible, never need a spotter, and also be able to be in the same prone sniping position without moving for days or even weeks on end. The Fury would be an extremely powerful individual during World War II, however after it would become a cosmonaut who went into space. However, upon returning to Earth's atmosphere, his body would be engulfed in flames, which left him heavily scarred and filled with rage. This whole experience changed his view on Earth, and now he is obsessed over it and wants to see the whole world go up in flames, triggering his obsession with pyromancy. The Fear would, it seems, be heavily affected by the parasite within him, as he would almost become like an insect both in abilities and in nature. Being able to camouflage himself fully, he would also be incredibly fast, would be able to climb trees like a spider, have a reptile-like tongue, and had an incredible knowledge of poisons that came from other reptiles and insects to use on his enemies. However, he also came with an insatiable hunger that hit him during the height of battle, especially if he was injured. The Joy was different, however. Born in 1922, she would be the daughter of one of the original members of the Philosophers and lost her father due to him exposing their deepest, darkest secrets about what the organization was actually planning to do with the world. A year prior to the formation of the Cobra unit, the Joy would be invited into a higher up role in the British military and was used as a special advisor, and in turn helped set up the Commando unit of Lay Force, as well as the original L Detachment, which was technically the first unit of the SAS. During this time, she would meet with Lay Force member David O, where they would together form the 22nd SAS Regiment and go on to plan dummy raids on Heliopolis and the bombings of German air bases during the North African campaign, specifically within Egypt. On top of all of that, the Joy would also be sent on extremely important snatch missions, where she would have to capture extremely important targets without killing them. An incredibly difficult task, but one she could pull off to such a high standard, helping her develop her new skills in close quarters combat. David O, witnessing all of the Joy's incredible feats in combat and during missions, would go on to state that the iconic phrase of the SAS and Del Boy from Only Fools and Horses, "He who dares wins," was coined thanks to all of her actions during the war. However, on the 30th of December 1941, the Joy and Zero would both go on to lose an extremely close friend from Lay Force in what was most likely Operation Crusader out within Egypt. Going up to the body, Zero would grab his SAS winged dagger pin and deliver it to the Joy, something she would cherish and keep with her throughout all of her life. Speaking of David O, he would eventually move career, most likely after the war, and joined MI6 back on British soil, and when joining them was codenamed with just the number of 0. After that, he went on to join with the CIA, becoming a part of the Bureau of Classified Planning, where he would be codenamed once again, but instead of the number 0, it would just be the word 0. Moving back to the Cobra unit, they would follow everything the Joy wanted them to do. They trusted her completely and actually became known as the Sons of the Boss, the other big name that the Joy would eventually be known as. The year was 1943 and Cobra were being sent out on some extremely confidential missions. These operations that they were being sent out on were some of the darkest operations ever recorded, so much so that they weren't ever to be released out into the open. Everything they did within it was obviously top secret, and with it, this whole squad was forbidden from being captured. Ultimately, if the worst case scenario happened, their corpse could not be left behind at all. How would they do that if they were dead, however? Well, all of them would carry on them a micro bomb, which would immediately trigger if it detected that they had died somehow, removing their whole corpse from the equation so no one could get any of their details. During this time, however, the Joy and the Sorrow would get together, and as a result, the Joy would find out she was expecting a child during one of their secret missions. A secret mission that was a vital one for the Philosophers, as they believed the scientist known as John von Neumann was a Nazi spy and was working on the Manhattan Project, which was essentially the nuclear bomb project. And he was someone who needed to be taken out, but also it had to be made to look like an accident. Learning about the news of her new unborn child during this specific mission, it completely distracted her and blew all of her cover, and as a result got her injured thanks to enemy gunfire, but luckily her unborn child would be saved from the bullet. That said, the Joy would be put into a coma for a full 3 months before fully regaining consciousness, and as soon as she was better after 6 months, the Joy stated that she was kept alive by her own body to be there for her unborn child. That said, she deeply regretted failing the mission, even though a lot of it was misinformation. But the Joy would go on to see the whole Cold War as her fault, because it was this mission that triggered it all in the first place, as well as her failures to get it done. That following year in 1944, the D-Day landings were just beginning, and during them the Cobra unit was sent out on a mission to locate and destroy several V-2 rocket installations near Juno Beach. As the big day of the D-Day attack came, Adamska, later to be known as Ocelot, the Joy and Sorrow's child, would go on to be born. However, the Joy was still serving even on the day of birth, and actually gave birth on the middle of the battlefield, being wounded in the process as well. This forced an immediate cesarean section that was a success, but it did result in her having a snake-shaped scar on her torso as a reminder of how Ocelot was brought into the world. Quickly after Ocelot was born, agents of the Philosophers would step in and take Ocelot from his parents and house him away for many years. During the war, the infighting at the Philosophers had started to take place, and one of the big events was the Manhattan Project and John von Neumann. Ultimately, the Russians wanted to force the Americans into removing him so that they could not create the plutonium bomb. However, this was found out and tensions boiled as a result. Because of how bad relations were getting, the Cobra unit was officially disbanded by 1947. A Russian member of the Philosophers known as Boris Volgin went on to make a dramatic decision during this time, as he would split the Philosopher's legacy and hide it within secret bank accounts in the countries of Switzerland, Hong Kong, and Australia, as well as many other economic strongholds. Whilst very few, if any, other than Boris knew of where the funds had gone, there was one record of them. That was stored on a single microfilm, and this was the only way the vast fortune could be accessed. Because of this, the Philosopher's legacy was believed to be lost, and with it, tensions got even worse throughout all of the world, splitting the three superpower nations of America, Russia, and China, turning them into enemies and triggering the Cold War, as each wanted to one-up the other and concentrate power within their own nation. On top of that, each wanted to split away from one another to try and locate the legacy for themselves. Ultimately, whoever found the legacy would be able to fully win the Cold War, and with it, become the most dominant superpower in the whole world. The legacy, however, continued into the Volgin bloodline and passed on to Yevgeny Borisovich Volgin, who would illegally take control of it from his father, and with it, he would go on to build up the military fortress of Groznygrad, and within create many new projects which would eventually include the major one known as the Shagohod, a hybrid screw-propelled vehicle that served as a mobile nuclear ballistic missile system. Volgin was a horrific individual with a terrifying past. Serving in World War II, Volgin was a part of the domestic branch of the Soviet secret police, the NKVD, and was in charge of punishing deserters of the Red Army. However, Volgin was remembered for being incredibly brutal and cold-blooded, and took part in an event known as the Katian Massacre, where 20,000 Polish officers would be murdered by the NKVD, where Volgin even removed their blindfolds before he beat them all to death. He would then go on to blame the other prisoners who were revolting against them to try and strike fear throughout. It was said he was also involved in other events out in Ukraine and Belarus, where he would eventually go on to kill over 100,000 anti-communist activists. After inheriting the legacy, Volgin would invest massively in all forms of weapon research, not worrying about the cost as mentioned earlier, and with it also must have researched his own body to turn it into a weapon, permanently surrounding himself in an electric charge, and was now capable of electric shock attacks. For the Joy, or the Boss as she will be named now, she would become part of the US government and would take part in yet again more secret projects. On the 1st of November 1951, she would be involved in the atomic weapons testing at the Nevada desert, which would hit her with a deadly amount of radiation, causing her to become completely infertile. Just a year prior, she would meet a young man known as Jack, who she would take a liking to after he had been a part of the Korean War. Taking Jack under her wing, she would teach him all he needed to know about combat, from how to deal with weaponry, how to survive out in the wild and hostile lands, the tactics of espionage, destruction, psychology, foreign languages such as Russian, and last but not least, her iconic CQC techniques, training it on each other. This whole experience meant the world to Jack, as he went on to almost worship the boss, or at least see her as more than a mentor, but more of a parental figure. This relationship was furthered even more in 1954 after Jack was present at the Bikini Atoll test of the first airborne detonation of a hydrogen bomb. This horrific test went on to affect Jack, but luckily not with life-threatening problems. Instead, he was also rendered completely sterile, giving the two something that they could both relate to, and increased their bond together. In 1957, the boss went on to a new project where she would be invited to a new school at the JFK Special Operations Center at Fort Bragg, which was a Halo school created to help with the development of the Halo jump, a high-altitude, low-opening parachuting technique which involves a free fall from an extremely high altitude of around 15 to 35,000 feet. However, 2 years after this, the boss was forced to leave Jack's side as his mentor, as she was given a brand new secret mission from the President of the United States on the 12th of June 1959. The mission here was to get an agent in the Soviet Union and discover their secrets when it comes to space technology. But there was a catch, as the CIA were extremely wary about the boss due to her heroic actions within World War II and did not want to help her plant a spy in the Soviet research lab. Knowing she had to do something, the boss turned back to the Philosophers and asked for their own spies to help with her task, but also knew this would be something she would regret in the future. Here she would be able to reach out to the Russian philosophers who were currently unhappy with the one-party communist state, as the boss would bribe them with huge sums of money, and with their help was able to place a sleeper agent inside the facility, and because of it, NASA were able to receive tons of technical data regarding the Soviet space program. The CIA were furious with the fact that the boss had succeeded in placing a sleeper agent into the Soviet facility and took action, trying to take credit for everything she had done and wanted to receive all of the information sent by the boss's spy. But the boss didn't mind, as it took the pressure off of her. However, the boss obviously started to become suspicious about what was going on, and when she personally witnessed some of the documents being sent over of the Soviets' technology and how Sputnik 5's design did not make sense or fit what they knew, the boss decided that she had to investigate it herself, and by 1961 she did just that, as she personally found her way into the facility and learned that the spy she spent so long trying to get in there was actually double-crossing the US and was feeding the American government complete lies. The true reason for why he did this was because the CIA handler was pocketing a large cut of his pay packet, leaving him with the thought that the risk was not worth it anymore, so he turned his back on the US. The CIA would also go on to learn the truth of what was going on during this time and knew they had to cover it up, and saw for the first time in the Philosophers' history that they did not have anything to do with the newly inaugurated president of the time, John F. Kennedy, and could not control what was going on there. Knowing that fact, the CIA placed all of the blame onto the boss, saying she had not done her research and the sleeper agent was unreliable, also saying she did not put in the correct failsafe to make sure he did the correct work, things like capturing his family and forcing him to do the job or they'd be killed, something the boss actually agreed with and felt like she failed in that respect. At this same time, the American philosophers also found out the boss had reached out to the anti-Moscow faction of the Soviet philosophers to grab a spy from them and use them as a sleeper. This faction were furious at her actions during this and questioned why they were not tipped off about it. Knowing they had to do something about this, the philosophers sent the boss on another mission, one that was to make sure their name was restored and she repaid her debt. Venturing forward to the Soviet Union, the boss would come face to face with one of her old comrades and past lover, the Sorrow. It was at this meeting where the boss pieced it all together, that the Sorrow was the one who converted the sleeper agent and put them against the CIA, although the Sorrow was unaware that it was the boss who was the one who sent this agent in the first place, because he had never been told by the Soviet philosophers. Whilst this was going on, the Soviet philosophers would capture Ocelot and threaten both of the agents with his life, stating that he would die unless the two fought to the death, and only one remained alive. Knowing that the end was coming for one of them, the Sorrow stepped forward, offering no resistance, telling the boss to shoot him and save their child. The boss took this and agreed, and killed him right there and then, saving Ocelot in the process. After this was done, the relationship with the Philosophers fell once again, and they started to fall out of favor with President Kennedy. Returning back to the US, the boss would be chosen to be a part of the Mercury project, and when joining it, went on to meet the research scientists who focused on AI known as Dr. Strangelove. During this project, the boss would go on to be sent into space in the year of 1961 to try and acquire data on how the human body would cope in those conditions, also being told that radiation was going to be a factor in this mission. Technically, the boss became the first unofficial American to go into space, where she would see the world from a new angle, and coming up with a new life goal of uniting it all together and making it a peaceful place to live once and for all, a similar mindset to what the original Philosophers had when they were first created. However, when returning to the planet on the 12th of April 1961, the capsule's addition of a window caused it to veer off course and crash land in the ocean, with the boss being thrown out of it and getting incredibly burnt by the cosmic radiation and also the heat of re-entry. Somehow, like when she got shot in the secret mission back in the day, the boss survived once again, but was sent to hospital and was sent into another coma for 6 months. During that time, Dr. Strangelove left, and the two never saw each other ever again. Seeing how bad this project had gone, the CIA knew they had to once again cover it up, and stated that the boss actually took part in the poorly executed Bay of Pigs invasion in Cuba, and that is what caused her injuries. A lie that, when looking at the boss's history of warfare, didn't quite add up. Whilst that was all going on, Adamska, or Ocelot, briefly worked as a member of the NSA and as a codebreaker under the codename of simply Adam. However, in September 1960, both he and his colleague of Eva would defect to the Soviet Union. That said, this report is somewhat conflicted, as another account states that the two were taken in and raised by the Spetsnaz GRU, as well as the one who inherited the Philosopher's legacy, Yevgeny Borisovich Volgin, and were with him since after World War II. Either way, Adamska would serve under Volgin's command of the GRU, as well as operating as a spy for both the KGB and the CIA, obviously organizations that were both under the ownership of the Philosophers. Thanks to his links to the legendary hero of the boss, Adamska was treated with a ton of respect and was given preferential treatment within all of the Philosophers organization, and was promoted to the rank of major extremely early, and by the early 60s was given the command of his own personal squad that would be known as the Ocelot Unit, who would be a selection of Spetsnaz squadrons who were extremely loyal to him and his rule, and would come at his own beck and call. In 1962, Zero, who was still working for the CIA during this period in time, went on a mission to help Dr. Nikolai Sokolov and his family defect from the Soviet Union and move over to the US. Sokolov was an incredible scientist who had been forced to work on Volgin's horrific projects to the point where he could not face it anymore, and was terrified for his family and wanted to save them from his own creations that he had been forced to make. Whilst travelling all 600 miles, Sokolov became absolutely exhausted and had to be taken to a hospital in West Berlin to be checked up. Whilst he was in there, however, the Cuban Missile Crisis took place, and after it calmed down on the 28th of October, both the Americans and Soviets reached a compromise to make sure it didn't happen again. The Soviets agreed that they would remove all of their missiles from Cuba, but in exchange, the Americans had to surrender Sokolov back over to the Russians. Upon doing this, Zero would venture back home and be reunited with the boss once again, and the two went on to set up a brand new CIA faction that would be known as the Fox Unit, which did not set well with the director of the Central Intelligence, who blocked it for a few years. The purpose of the Fox Unit was to be a special services division that would be sent on covert missions and special operations, as well as intelligence duties. Zero had another reason for why he wanted to set up Fox, however, and that was to try and launch a second secretive mission to capture Sokolov once again and bring him into the US. Whilst he made plans for how he would actually go about doing this, Zero would go on to make friends with Jack, probably finding him through the boss, who would have been him a lot in the prior years. At the same time, he would also go on to recruit 2 other operatives, one being Donald Anderson, who was extremely proficient in weaponry and high-tech equipment, and was finding it incredibly difficult to find a job due to racial discrimination, as well as Dr. Clark, who would later be known as Paramedic, who described herself as a well-respected physician and a spot spotless reputation, being highly skilled, patient, and good looking to boot. Zero saw these two as individuals with a lot of potential talent and brought them in. However, within 3 days of bringing Anderson in, received multiple letters of complaints due to him being an African-American man. Ignoring all of that, Zero also went on to set up his own unique club named the Yuma Finders Club, which was dedicated to finding unidentified mysterious animals that were considered legendary or non-existent, and upon its launch, Zero became the president of it, with Anderson being his vice president, as he also showed a keen interest in cryptozoology. Whilst all projects within the CIA were being set up, Jack in the year of 1964 would be serving in the Special Forces unit known as the Green Berets. Formed originally back in 1952 by Colonel Aaron Bank, this group was tasked always with 5 primary missions: unconventional warfare, foreign internal defense, special reconnaissance, direct action, and counter-terrorism. During this time, and by the time of 1964, Jack had become extremely proficient in sniping both in urban and marine environments, and had become renowned for eating snakes during previous survival training exercises, something that would benefit him in future missions. Thanks to everything he had done, Jack had become extremely honoured and well rewarded, getting a ton of commendations which included the Army Achievement Ribbon, the Good Conduct Ribbon, Defense Distinguished Service Ribbon, Korean Service Ribbon, a possible Vietnam Service Ribbon, and the Distinguished Service Cross Ribbon, as well as a few others. But as mentioned, the year was now 1964, and the group of Fox had officially been launched, finally getting the approval of the DCI. The force was fully kitted out with new equipment such as active sonar, motion detectors, and anti-personal sensors, and was sent out on sneaking covert missions, with many of the other CIA groups naming these individuals as being a group of eccentrics, weirdos, and oddballs. Regardless, Zero's time had come, and it was finally time to try and launch the mission to recover the Soviet scientists of Sokolov, utilizing the Fox unit to do all of the work, under the supervision of the boss as well. Here they would go on to deploy Jack, or how he was codenamed Naked Snake, into Soviet territory, deploying the world's first halo jump to get to the specific location that Sokolov was in. Snake would of course be successful in the first part of the mission, extracting Sokolov from the KGB guards, however in the process would be reacquainted with his once mentor, the boss, and betrayed by her, being left critically injured from her attack. Sokolov would then be captured once again, and had Volgin seized Sokolov's project, was also unleashing an American Davy Crockett nuclear weapon on Russian citizens, making it look like the Americans attacked innocent civilians and triggered a major international incident. With how bad the Virtuous mission ended, the head of the CIA almost ordered the execution of both Snake and Major Zero. However, both were still needed, as there was to be one more operation that they were to be a part of, forced by the American and Russian governments. And if that were to fail as well, Snake would end up in a hospital bed awaiting the firing squad. This operation would be named as Operation Snake Eater, and would have Snake go up against all of the agents mentioned in this video, from the Snake's mentor, the boss, to her son Ocelot and his squad, the whole of the Cobra unit, the sleeper agent trained from a child known as Eva, and even the ghostly presence of the Sorrow, whose ghost lived on thanks to his own unique skills. But for the results of that mission, you'll just have to play through the campaign of Metal Gear Solid Delta Snake Eater. This for now has been the lore you need to know before you can dive into the main part of the story and learn about how Snake dealt with all of it and challenged his once mentor, who he looked up to. Honestly, this game is an iconic piece of video game history, and with this remake of it, we can dive into the world all over again and experience that revolutionary gameplay with new shiny graphics, which certainly I love because I enjoy making these videos as cinematic as possible. But anyways, this has been the lore that you need to know before playing Metal Gear Solid Delta, from the Philosophers to the boss, as well as Snake and the Cobra unit. I want to say a huge thank you for watching this video, and a big thanks to Konami and the Metal Gear brand for sponsoring this channel and for allowing me to make a video on this legendary franchise. I absolutely loved playing through the game again to make this lore video, and honestly I cannot recommend it more playing it for yourself. Graphically I think it looks incredible, but it's also so true to its original design, so it's a great chance to play the game that made a lot of our childhoods, and for people who have never experienced this story or franchise before. Links in the description below if you want to grab the game now on Xbox, PS and PC. I also want to say a big thanks to my patrons as well, including my small fishers, my YouTube channel Wise Ones, Video Gamer 75, Sith Lord 906, Planet Nanontarium, and V3XXE, my big fishes Ben Chance, This Mind of Mine, and Anthony Bonfiglio, my shark Dan F, my megalodons Hazy Thoughts and Sinus, and my incredible starfish Nanohertz. Thank you all once again for watching this video, and honestly, if you want more Metal Gear lore videos, please do let me know. I would definitely not say no to making more, but for now, I shall see you all in the next one. Cheers.